Hello and welcome to Two Girls in a Pod. Wow, what a week. Warm weather. Today it's a little fresh. I don't know about you guys, but it kind of messes with our moods a little bit.
Yeah, yesterday was 78. High today's like 64. It's a bit of a difference though. There's a little bit of a wind out there.
But I think really identifying how it just messes with us.
Yeah.
And so it's going to kind of a nice segue into what we're talking about today is work smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
And who doesn't want to do that?
Mhm.
It's interesting because, when we're talking even about the weather, it impacts your energy level.
Yeah.
So when your energy level goes down, you don't feel productive. I know I don't,
Right.
or I feel like not sluggish, but I don't know, what would you call it?
At least the sun is shining. That helps.
Really, you can always go look at that. But when we're talking about work smarter, not harder, that's something that's used a lot in business and stuff like that. But I think it's something that we should do everywhere, even in our relationships and anything that we're doing. We expend so much energy and it's not in the direction that we want to go anyway sometimes.
Exactly. And there are some strategies and things like that that you can do to help with that.
What's one of your favorite ones?
If I take the time that I need to, I guess, set the stage, and for me, that's gratitude. Doing that practice in the morning kind of helps set the tone and helps me get in the right frame of mind to be more productive.
I agree. I think first off, we have to start in a place that we have to start in a good mental place.
Yeah.
Because when we aren't in that good mental place, it almost feels like we're starting like way further from the finish line
With yeah, and there's a deficit to begin with.
Oh, 100%. One of the things is when we were talking about this is that sometimes we can become so overwhelmed by whatever a task is. Sometimes even in relationships, we can become overwhelmed with something like, what's for dinner? I've had a rough day. Now I got to do dinner, or I've got to take care of the kids, or oh my God, now my spouse wants to talk to me and I just need a minute. Or so we get overwhelmed. So then it's almost like, I don't know, you're not parenting as effectively, you're not communicating as effectively. You have stuff in the pantry and you're opening the door and that overwhelmed feeling just kind of becomes a roadblock.
Mhm.
And I think the thing is that comes to setting boundaries.
Mhm.
Sometimes I think you have to set boundaries. Boundaries is something that people just struggle with.
Mhm.
And I think it's because they think I don't know what they perceive it as, but sometimes it's even, when I get home, I need 15 minutes.
Yeah. Well, it comes across as rude a lot of times, I think. But there are ways to do that and implement those boundaries, I feel like, in a positive way. It comes through that communication, that clear communication.
And we talked about that. How do we communicate effectively what it is that we're needing? So even if you're doing a project, and we do some projects around the coaching, and it's like sometimes if we're not clear in that, we'll be there. One of us is doing one thing and we're looking at each other like we're not even on the same page. So it's like slowing it down and then communicating those expectations
Mhm.
for whatever is going on.
Exactly. If you want to have more organization, everybody has to know what's expected of them.
And I think that's a hard one too. And I particularly in business, when you have people, supervisors, office manager, whatever, and they know the agenda, but you do not, you kind of feel lost, or it's kind of like you feel like you're spinning your wheels. You don't know what you're doing and it's not a clear picture.
Mhm.
And I think that communication is so huge
Yeah.
to, I mean, we're all, everything, in my practice, I'm always communication, communication, communication,
Yeah.
because you have to communicate your expectations. So your children, your family, your friends, your employers, your employees, whatever it is understanding what it is that you're needing.
Yeah.
That's working smarter, not harder. Because when you don't, you feel like you're constantly hitting that wall, and then the frustration comes in and messes with our mental peace. And Nobody's winning in this situation.
Yeah, well, and then you also end up with redundancy. You're having to redo, or this wasn't done first. That prioritization is a huge piece of that.
Oh, that's a really good point,
Mhm.
because I think that's the thing that really aggravates people is when I've done a task and I will have this, because this is an area that a lot of I thought I was doing it right. Well, they changed the rule. They didn't tell me. So now I went and spent an hour and a half on this thing, and now I'm told it's not the right way. And so now there's frustration. And then that self-doubt starts with some people. Oh, geez, I don't even know my job.
And you see that with people a lot of times in a new job. If the training is not what it should be, then you
Mhm.
have somebody go into a new position, and if everything isn't explained to them correctly, or they don't know what that expectation is, then they go and do the job, and then somebody is upset. But that's the thing. It has to be clearly communicated.
And I think the other thing that I see, and I can feel that sometimes, is we get overwhelmed because there's so much to do. But when we have the prioritization piece to it, so how do I prioritize whatever it is we're doing? But the other thing is, and we had this when we were helping your mom and brother move. We're in there packing away, and finally we both realized, I don't know, about an hour later or something, we haven't seen your brother.
Mhm.
So I said, okay. So I pause. I go into his room. He is literally standing in the middle of the room, spinning around, just going to start. I said, what are you doing? He goes, he puts his hands on his head and he goes, I don't know where to start. There's so much to do. And I'm looking at him, I said, so you haven't done anything? He couldn't, because the task overwhelmed his senses. And then he got nothing done.
Yeah.
So then I'm there like, okay, hon, this is what I need to do. I broke it down for him. I said, do this first. When you're done with this, I said, if you still can't, you come get me and I'll go tell you the next thing. He understood he was overwhelmed. Once he got into the groove of it and he could then see it in pieces, it worked really effectively.
Yes, that is a huge piece of it. I think that breaking it down in chunks and making it more manageable, because if you're looking at the whole thing, yeah, overwhelmed for sure.
And I think a really good example is yesterday in session, my client student teaches, and she teaches Spanish. And so it was finals. And so the student's in there and she's just standing back observing, the teacher lets her. The girl gets there and it's like that deer in the headlight look. I don't know these words. And so my client asked the teacher, can I intervene and can I see if I can assist? And the teacher, absolutely. So she went to the student and says, do you remember the alphabet? No. Do you remember your ABC? Your the vowels. And so she couldn't. So my client told her them. And she goes, now when you look at the word, she says, don't look at the whole word. She says, do it in pieces as you do it. She said she stepped back. The girl was able to do it. I don't know why. I don't know if we're taught this. I don't know where this comes from, but we will see the big thing. And then we see, oh my God, this is what we have to do. It's like we forget everything is done in pieces and in steps.
Yeah, and I think that when you don't break it down like that, you end up, and this is interesting because in the past it has been promoted to be a multitasker. And really, they have shown that multitasking, you are not being as efficient as you could be.
And I will often hear, oh, I'm a great multitasker. And I'm there, but when we're multitasking, something is still missing.
Yeah.
Because the other thing is also when you're a good multitasker, guess what? Employers give you more to do because you're so good at multitasking. Well, now, multitasking two things is one thing, but when you're trying to multitask 3 or 4 projects, or, it's kind of like when you're trying to, as a parent, if you have your kids all acting out and you're trying to address all of them, but each one is having a different issue and you're talking, it's not as effective as if you just go and address each thing at one time.
Mhm.
You tend to get more done and you feel more productive. Sometimes I think when you multitask, you just feel tired. I do. If
You-
I'm multitasking, oh yeah.
You do. And the stats have shown that it is less productive to be that way. And a lot of times you end up with loose ends. And a lot of times you feel like that you don't accomplish one thing really fully because you've got so many irons in the fire at one time.
And I don't know, when you're in school and you're to become a therapist, they really teach you about being present. So for me, if somebody's in my office, I'm very attentive to what's going on with them. That it's one place I don't multitask. I do notes in session, but I do that with clients. If they ask me what I'm writing, I can tell them, or if they want something put in, they can tell me. It doesn't matter. It's theirs. I don't care about that. And I'll have sometimes they'll ask me, what are you saying? I'll tell them and they'll say, oh, okay.
And which-
But it's multitasking, but it's not, because it's still engagement with them.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say, is that it's, still the focus is on
Them.
what's in front of you.
Yeah. So, but I find sometimes, and we'll both find this when she's doing something and I'm trying to do two things at one time, but then I need to engage you with something. So now we're all and then it just gets frustrating.
Yeah, and I think that that's where a lot of times communication gets lost as well.
Absolutely. There's so many things that we're kind of maybe taught to do, whether we're taught like, okay, Christy, this is how we do that. You're going to multitask. We just kind of start learning these behaviors. And I think sometimes, especially in employment, they want you to have these behaviors because the more productive you are, blah, blah, blah. We know how that machine works.
Yeah.
But I think the thing is when we start all of these things that we're talking about all tying together, in order for me to prioritize, I have to communicate. I have to know even internal communication of what's important, what is going to be the thing I need to get done first. What are those priorities? Okay. One of the things I would use with my students when I was working with them is red, green, and yellow folders, because they know what that means. And I would tell them, if it's red, that's really serious. You got to get that done. And then from the red, it goes into your green folder, which is, it goes back to the school. Yellow is, it's put off a little bit. It's not anything within a week or something. So it helped them be organized, because they were trying to do, a lot of times they were getting overwhelmed because they didn't know what to do first, because to them, they got to do it all. So that was just a way to organize them.
And I think for students, that probably works really well. You're constantly having to look through your folders and do all of those kinds of things. Now, I know for me, I can put the 3 folders aside and never look in there again. That's how it works for me.
Because we have not worked enough on, to be honest. This organizational, but not only does what it does is it helps you prioritize, but it helps you to organize. When you don't have those organizational skills, and sometimes we think we're organized, because I've had that with other people where you go in their office and I don't know how they find anything. Yours is better.
It's a beautiful disaster.
She's trying to convince me of this. But however, if I ask her, most times if I say, where is it? She knows where that is. And then sometimes it's like, I don't know, haven't seen that in a bit, oh, really? So, but that's something you've been working on, because you've really been working on your office and your desk and your things like this. And I think those things are important, because even though it is beautiful chaos, it's really not organization, and our brain sees the chaos.
And it can be overwhelming, and that's what makes you walk away. It's sort of like David in the room, like you said, because it's like you see all of this clutter around you and you're just like, oh, no, I don't even want to deal with it. Walk away, just walk away.
Yeah, something magical is going to happen when I walk out that door.
Yeah.
There's some genie or fairy that's going to get that taken care of.
My mind will be free.
And then what happens though is when we come back, we have no more clarity if we haven't sat there and said, even like with him, just giving him clarity, honey, you just start with this piece. Then we're going to move to this piece.
And I think, once you hit those little goals, those short-term things, you're, like we said, about chunking it down into those smaller, more achievable goals. I feel like that once you do that, you can be so much more productive in the long run.
She used the term chunking, and chunking is something that we use in therapy, and particularly with people who have impulse control disorders, which is like ADHD. They have so much thought coming in. So even if you tell them, and I always tell parents, don't tell them, you can tell one kid, go up and brush your teeth, brush your hair, and put on your pajamas. They'll go up there and they'll do that. You tell that to somebody who has an impulse control, and they come back down maybe with their pajamas on, and you're there like, are you going to brush your hair? You going to brush your teeth? Did you do it? No, was I supposed to? They can't do that. So we do a lot of chunking with them. Also, even this is something I tell people, even when they don't have impulse control, is sometimes you have to, if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, as they get overwhelmed, I use a timer and I'll say, okay, you have to work for 5 minutes. You have to do your schoolwork for 5 minutes. And then the timer's going to ring, and then you're going to get 1 minute to get up, move around, get a snack, whatever, come back, set the timer again for 5 minutes. And then they get into a rhythm. It's when they feel, I think it's like all of us. It's like when you feel there's no end, or, oh my God, I'm going to have to sit here for an hour and a half and do this. Some don't. I am not one to sit for an hour and a half I was horrible in meetings.
Yeah.
I admit it, I was horrible. I'm there like, oh my God, I could be doing something more productive, and I know the company thought it was productive. I did not. I was just there like, so I got in a little bit of trouble, Heather and I, in meetings, but that's a whole other story. But that's part of what it is.
Yeah. And doing it for smaller amounts of time, definitely. And you learn those things about yourself and how you'll be more productive if you know how to set that.
And I learned even in something that I will even do is because I do telehealth. So a lot of times what I would do is I wouldn't even get up. I would just stay there, get on my next one, stay there, get on my next one. And I found that it was starting to create something in me. So now in between I get up, I will get steps, I'll get a snack, I will do something, play with the dog, all of those things. And I have found that it helps me. I now feel more productive. I feel more energetic. And so those things, as adults, we can do the same thing.
Yes. Taking breaks is a huge thing. It's really important, I think, to do that.
Once again, and in that case, you're prioritizing yourself. The more mentally healthy you are, and this is what companies I feel sometimes miss, the more mentally healthy their employees are, the more productive they're going to be.
Yeah.
Pretty soon people start taking sick time, they start not doing as much. All of these things come into play because it's the reaction and response to that mental burnout, because I don't feel like I'm getting enough done, or whatever that is.
It's a lack of self-care.
When we're working in relationships, same thing. I'll tell them, when do you prioritize your relationship? Well, we both work till 7. By the time we come home, we make dinner, we put the kids to bed, and I'm just tired and I want to play on my phone for a minute. Okay, well, you're not prioritizing your relationship. And then, well, I don't have time. Of course you have time. It's what you're prioritizing. So that's the other thing. You have to prioritize the things that are going to make you more mentally healthy. And we are always on this podcast going to promote being mentally healthy.
And it takes structure. It takes routine.
Oh, yeah.
It takes setting those things in place, because that's a way of being proactive. A lot of people, I think, don't realize the benefits of being proactive. We talk about, like, even when it comes to food or those kinds of things, meal planning is huge as far as saving time, as far as being convenient, because a lot of times people don't make healthy choices because they are looking for the fastest thing. They're starving because they have not planned this out.
And, that's a really important one. And also, because I do the cooking, I find that when I don't have that meal and you'll ask me what's for dinner, I can feel that, not angst, but oh my God. And then it's like, I'm just there, like, when I sit there and we shop and I'll say, okay, these are meals for these days, and that my mind feels clear. That's one thing that I've taken off my plate that I don't have to worry about.
That you're not having to deal with in a moment where you are tired and depleted and cannot even think of anything else. That's how come people end up with fast food every night or those kinds of things, because they just cannot have the energy to do anything else.
That's prioritizing ourselves and our physical well-being and stuff like that. And for me, it's about my mental well-being, because it's one less thing I don't have to think about, really. If I do that meal planning, and we usually do our meal prep, all of our planning on our weekend for the week and stuff. And like I said, then it's like, okay, you got to do this. If I'm marinating stuff, or I've got stuff to go in the oven, then I just delegate that to you. That's the other thing. This is a thing that sometimes people have a problem doing, and that is asking for help. I don't know if they feel like if I ask for help, somebody's going to think they're incompetent. I don't know. But we do not ask for help enough.
I think that it's maybe that could be a contributing factor, but also not wanting to inconvenience people. I think a lot of times, we're afraid to ask somebody because they feel like it's going to take away time from someone else.
And yeah, that's another good point. But I think the thing is when we don't ask, we're not going to know.
Right.
If somebody can't do it, and if they say, oh man, I wish I could, but I can't, then that's okay. Then maybe you go to the next person or whatever it is. But then I will have sometimes people will be there researching stuff and they're like, why don't you just ask the person? And they're like, well, I'm supposed to know this. I said, we're not, sometimes we just will have those things in a situation. It doesn't matter. Everybody is learning something. And especially when we're in employment, we are learning as we go. And I think that when we realize that, or even if you have got something down, take the minute to help those people who are struggling. I always tell people when I mentor other therapists, I do not make them reinvent the wheel. If I have access to it, when my nephew's ex-girlfriend went into this profession and she was lost, she goes, I don't know a lot of this stuff. I told her, you know what? I have a lot of resources for you. So I gave her all my books on different therapy stuff. And I says, go through, look at it. It's not, oh, well, you got a degree. You should be. No, this is not a competition. What do you say?
It's about collaboration.
Exactly. And the more that we can do that, and the more that we can change our mindset, and that's what I really loved about Parissa when we had her on the podcast. And if you haven't listened, phenomenal story about getting to that mental place and figuring out, doing what was resonated with her. But she talked about that. Well, what are you going to give your secrets away? Why don't I want other people to be her thing was, I want other people to be successful. Why am I going to hold that back? We talk about this all the time. It's not a competition out there. There is enough for everybody to be successful.
The name of that episode, by the way, is Go For It.
I didn't think I was, see, she remembers those things. But no, I think those are really important things. And, we do that by listening to podcasts too. So we get ideas, we learn from others. We do this podcast. So hopefully something we say resonates with somebody.
Yeah.
It's not about holding on to some secret to success or to be mentally okay. Everybody should be mentally well, everybody. But we are finding more and more people are having anxiety, and it's because they're feeling overwhelmed. But part of it is they're feeling overwhelmed because they don't do these steps. They don't pause. They don't prioritize. They are not communicating. They're trying to multitask and get everything done. And then sometimes it turns out catastrophic because when they're multitasking, they realize, oh, I left out a key component because I was doing this key component or whatever it is. So in order to change that, we have to learn to slow things down. It feels like people are always going 90 to nothing.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons we love going to Mexico too. No, it's like time is so different.
They're on their own time, their own schedule.
Mañana.
Yeah.
Mañana.
Maybe
Tomorrow. They don't care. And so you kind of adopt that thing. And in some time, at first I was there like, still had that mentality. Now I'm just like, oh, mañana. Sometimes I do that here. No.
Yeah.
But that's what it is. And I think the other thing we have to do is really pay attention to our body, pay attention to the messages that it's giving. And sometimes it is that thing of you have to slow down.
Right.
One of my clients, overwhelmed, had a whole bunch of stuff going on. And I'm thinking, oh man, because when you have all that, it kind of comes up and it peaks. But then when you drop, depending on, and with his mental illnesses, you kind of hit a bottom top, not like before, but it's exhaustion when you get overly mentally stimulated. And sometimes we don't realize that in the things that we're doing, whether it's our jobs or whatever, we start to get overly mentally stimulated.
Mhm.
And, there are some companies now who are actually, they implement mental health days into their, it's not part of their PTO. It's actually, they'll allot, say, 2 or 3 mental health days a year or whatever. And you're having that day where you're feeling overwhelmed. They understand this. So then you take that mental health day and they want you to go and recharge, do something that's not work related in order to do that.
Yeah, and a lot of times you have a problem even with people with that. Like feel like that they're going to be behind. So even if they take the time off, they're still going to work or do some things because they feel like, well, it just falls back on me anyway. So, I mean, you get it that people get overwhelmed with all that.
But that's where that comes in, asking for help
Hmm.
and also still prioritizing,
Yeah.
and that organization of whatever it is that you have to do.
Hmm.
Those things become so important. I had a client once, and the kid was really a great kid. She'd get up, make her bed, do all that. But every once in a while, she'd get up, she's cranky, maybe stuff at school, I don't know. And I was talking to the parents, and I told them, I said, as an adult, guess what? We get FMLA paperwork. I fill out FMLA paperwork for people when their anxiety is so bad or whatever, then we have to modify their schedule a little bit and all of this. But yet we don't do that with children.
Hmm.
And so I told him, I says, well, why don't you do FMLA like with her? And they're like, what? But they did it. So they gave her permission that maybe once a month or once every 2 months, whatever it was, she didn't have to do her morning chores. The most amazing thing that I found, and they found, is just that she had the permission to have that time off.
Mhm.
She didn't use it. But I think it's like with a lot of people.
Just knowing you have it.
Yeah, like, oh my God, there's something that's going to help me. If I do have that and I can't work through, I can do it. Those are the things.
Mhm.
And sometimes I guess maybe we're asking for help and we don't realize it. We're using more vacation time or sick time. That's us still asking for help, but it's just not the communication that we need.
Right.
So, I mean, there's a lot to really working, but it's a lot, but it's not. But because once you get, and you said something really good, and I think that's really important, is creating that schedule or that pattern because you feel less chaotic.
Mhm.
So having that pattern, get up the same time every day, have your breakfast, do your routine every day, because what happens is your body knows, kind of like that meal prepping. It's one thing I don't have to do.
Mhm.
I have some people who they know what clothes they're going to wear. They get up, they do it, and their day runs smoothly. Have that day where they forget to do their clothes, set out their clothes, or it's in the laundry. It's like their day goes all wonky.
Exactly. You're always feeling like you're running behind. And there's ways to implement that schedule to where that you even have time for yourself. I think a lot of times, people do that thing of staying up later or whatever just to have that few minutes on their phone or that. But if we were actually scheduling that time in, all of it would make sense and you would have a regular bedtime and you would get up and you would feel better and you know what I mean?
And you know what I think is really interesting is that when you realize that we don't schedule for us.
Mm-mm.
We will schedule for work, we will schedule for others, we will schedule all sorts of stuff. And somehow, and people sometimes feel, well, it's selfish to schedule something. No, once again, we cannot feed from an empty plate.
Yeah.
And we continue to do this.
Yeah.
So all of these things, if you're listening to this and you just pick one thing to start with,
Right.
then do it consistently and then start to pay attention to how other things start moving more smoothly and things like that. But most importantly, start paying attention to your mental peace.
Yes.
Because once our mental peace gets there, it shuts down everything. It shuts down the body.
And then you have more clarity
Yes.
when you get to that place that you come up with that plan.
Absolutely. Hopefully, as we're talking about this, it resonates with people. And once again, it's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't just do it once and say, well, that didn't work, or you do it once and then, or 3 times and then it falls off. It's the consistency of it that's really important.
You have to build it and there'll be adjustments that you have to make over time to accommodate for how things are for you, and you'll eventually get it figured out.
And, we've talked about this, even like with working out, people will have this, they'll put this idea in their head. I got to do an hour a day. And if they can't do an hour, they'll do nothing. This is how our brain works. It's very interesting. And I always tell people, then get up and do 5 minutes.
Yeah,
But that's not, I said, it's still 5 minutes more than you did. It's still better than zero.
yeah.
And so doing a little of something that is moving towards you being mentally healthy, mentally prepared is really key and important to being that successful individual you want to be. And I think we all want success. And once again, success is defined differently. But without that mental piece of it, we're going to struggle. And so it's one of those things.
And there are a lot of people out there struggling with it. Obviously, there are even apps that have been introduced now to help people with productivity. I know that Google has something like that, and then To-Do List, and there's a few.
Oh my goodness, yeah, because we are getting bombarded with a lot of stuff. So once again, even asking for help is using an app.
Mhm.
Sometimes you have to do that. We started to use our calendar that we use together, or
Yeah, the Google Calendar.
go do it. Okay, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but we keep going.
I think we've got it figured out now.
It took a hot minute, but I was there like, oh, I don't know. I'm going to sit down and do that. What do you do when you have an appointment? We have this, and I'm there like, how do I know? Well, now I know because I have to look at my. It'll send me a notification.
Yeah, shared calendars are helpful sometimes.
And I do that too. I tell people, you have a phone. You use it for everything else. Use it to help you stay on time, be organized, do all of those things that we're talking about. Ask for help. And asking an app, same difference.
Right.
So we really hope that something that we talked about today resonates with you, and that it helps to, above all, we want you to know that people in general struggle with some of these things sometimes. But once again, it's about work smarter, not harder, because the harder we work, the less productive we feel, the more mental strain it has on us, all of those things.
The more you feel drained.
Yes. So taking care of yourself, that should be a priority. That on your priority list, that should be your number one priority. Taking
Definitely.
care of yourself.
Yes.
And as always,
So hopefully one of these strategies will work for you. If you would like to leave some feedback, please do that at twogirlsinapod.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, wherever you spend your time listening to podcasts, you'll find us there as well.
and also on YouTube at Adventures of Two Girls in a Pod. And yeah, if there's a strategy that you've come up with that works really well for you, let us know. We will share that.
Yeah.
Because what did we say? It's not a competition. It's collaboration. So once again, thank you so much. Follow, like, subscribe, whatever else one does, as we appreciate it. We hope that you guys have a wonderful, mentally healthy week, and that you are prioritizing yourself. And we will be back next week. Thank
Bye.
you so much. Bye.